Well, dear colleagues, I think it's time to resume our conference. I will present our second roundtable this afternoon. So welcome again, and to our colleagues online. We had many questions already from different countries. It's good news. So, well, we have our second panel with 4 presentations. Mr. Jedediah Jonker is an expert in methods and techniques and also a researcher at the Rekenkamer in the Netherlands, the Supreme Audit Institutions in the Netherlands. Strange language. There are some words that are impossible to pronounce for me, but fortunately it was almost okay. Emmanuel Sangra is in charge of the evaluation unit at the Swiss Federal Audit Office. He's been for a long time the president of the National Evaluation Society in Switzerland. Niels-Erik Brokop is a principal manager at the European Court of Auditors with high expertise in performance auditing. And Erkki Must is a senior auditor of the ECA as well, with expertise in performance audit and evaluation. And he presented a case study in the last meeting we had of the working group of evaluation in Vilnius recently. So the 4 of them will present case studies, as this morning it was intended to exchange experience and have practical examples of what happens in other countries in order to exchange ideas and see what works and not. Thank you very much. So each side has around 20-30 minutes for presentation. So afterwards we can have questions from here and from online colleagues. So it's up to you to decide to do that from the table, from the pulpit. Okay. So Mr. Jonker, please, you can start. Thank you. Sorry, it was Emmanuel Sangra. I'm sorry. Emmanuel Sangra will start with the Swiss Federal Audit Office. I'm sorry.
Well, 2 o'clock, one of the warmest days in Luxembourg after the lunch. I'm very lucky to present it and to stand at this position in order not to sleep. But I will present the evaluation at the Swiss Federal Audit Office. I will present the way we are working, and you see here the overview. Okay. Okay, I will present the mandate of the Swiss Federal Audit Office, speak a little bit about performance audit versus evaluation, because it's a traditional question, about methods we use, and about our resources. And I will take one example of an evaluation we did 6 months ago about promotion of agricultural biogas installations, and then a conclusion. I will do it correctly now. Okay, now our mandate. We have a special institutional setting at the Swiss Federal Audit Office. We are in between the Parliament and the government. We assist Parliament and the Federal Council. We are independent. We are only bound by the Constitution and the law. We can elaborate our own annual audit program, and we even can refuse Parliament or government proposition. We never did it, but in the law, it is written that we can refuse it. It's a good sign that so we can be independent. And we can question legislation. If there are problems of coherence, if the legislation needs to be adapted to new evolutions, to new technologies, if the formulation, the art, how the legislation is being written is problematic, so if it generates implementations problem, we can say it in our report. You can question legislation, we even can make recommendation about legislation. It's quite important for doing evaluation. What are auditing criteria? It's quite standard criteria. We have regularity and legality, and that's compliance. And we have also economy, efficiency, and efficacy. And we have a Federal Audit Office Act. And the most important for the evaluation is the C letter, the financial expenditure. We have to audit whether the financial expenditures have achieved the intended objectives. And this article permit us to make evaluation. The other is cost, benefits, proportion, and the economically the economy criteria. So old act, maybe 25 years old, so we use these words which are in this act when we are presenting ourselves. The words evaluate every year, it can change, but now, of course, when we are speaking about ourselves, we have to use our own act. Some words about evaluation and performance audit. Of course, we spoke a lot about INTOSAI Gov 9400, but we also have ESAI 300. We must not neglect ESAI 300 and 3000, 3100 and 3200, because there are a lot of standards of directive in this standard we can use also as an evaluator. So we define ourselves as evaluation is a systematic and transparent assessment of the effects of a policy, taking into account its conception and implementation. It aims to assess the relevance of the policy. At the Swiss Federal Audit Office, we say we make an evaluation when we are auditing effects. It's very easy, this way of defining. When we are considering if a road has the end user of a policy, when you are, for example, if they are satisfied about the road state, so we make an evaluation because we are speaking about effects, about outcomes, or about impacts. But of course, we have to consider the conception and the political will, the legislation, the inputs, and then the implementation, the organization, the coordination, communication between the different actors, the infrastructure which is being developed, and the control system, and then the outputs. But when we speak about effects, then the name of the report is evaluation. We had another way of distinguishing performance audit and evaluation, but it was quite complicated. We had 6 questions and say, does the project examine a public policy or a state measure without focusing on a particular administration unit? If you answer yes, you have 2 points. If you say no, it's 0 points. Does it potentially include the politically defined objective, and could it lead to legislative change? Yes, 2 points, likely 1 point, no, 0 points. Impact model, or does the project examine the causal relationship between governmental action and external effects? Another question important for defining participation: does your project systemically include stakeholders? About methods, does the project require a combination of social research methods or including quantitative methods? And then the publication, does the project include the publication of the reports with a transparent description of the method used? And if you have more than 8 points, it is an evaluation before it's an audit. So you say for distinguishing both, there are a lot of different criteria. You have never the right thing. That's an evaluation, that's a performance audit, but it's a mixture from criteria. But at the institution now, since maybe 5 years, we say when we are measuring impacts, when we are auditing impacts or outcomes, then we are doing evaluation. That's our way of defining. Of course, you have a lot of different ways to define evaluation. Some they say that performance audit is that and evaluation is that, or performance audit is under category of evaluation, or the opposite. SAIs 300, they say evaluation is an under category of performance audit, or evaluation and performance audit treat a similar question, but not all the similar questions. So that's the way we are defining performance audit in comparison with evaluation. But every different court of audit or audit office have their own way of defining it. What are we using? What method do we use at the Swiss Federal Audit Office? First, I want to say the most important and the most difficult when we are doing an evaluation or a performance audit is to define the questions. That's the most difficult, the right question. When you have the right question, you did already 50% of the job. And then you choose the methods. And the methods, we like to make triangulation. We like to use many methods in the same evaluation. The typical method is the OK, document analysis, literature reviews, groups interviews or in-depth interviews that we do every time when we do evaluation. We use these two methods, but sometimes we use statistical data analysis, 60% of all our evaluation. Sometimes we make surveys among stakeholders, sometimes case studies, sometimes international comparison, and we mix these different methods. So we speak about triangulation. We apply several methods to cross-check results. We make them, when we do it, we make the results more robust. Every evaluation has 3 to 7 different methodological modules, and we try to mix qualitative and quantitative methods. It's quite interesting for having more robust results. What's very typical for an evaluation is involving stakeholders, and they say in the InterSci.gov 9400, the association of stakeholders is a key point of the evaluation of public policies. Involving stakeholders at different moments, but one is as a source of information for the evaluation when you make interview, online or phone or postal survey, or sometimes we involve them in the organization of the evaluation by the conception of the evaluation. When we are discussing about the results and the recommendation, we constitute an advisory group with representatives of the stakeholders, and we do it almost for 30% of our realized evaluation. And I say it often, but we increase the independence of the SAI if we don't forget to involve one important stakeholder. We have to involve all the stakeholders in our evaluation. It would be very dangerous if you only involve some stakeholders, and that's a very important standard in evaluation. How do we design an evaluation? So, as I told, we use methodological modules. So we make, for example, in this example, we make 5 modules: 1 interviews, 1 statistic analysis, 1 document analysis, international comparison, make a survey, we gave maybe an external mandate, and then we make the reports. And that lasts almost 1 year. And when we have an advisory group, when we involved in stakeholder in the organization of the evaluation, we have 3 meetings, one at the beginning and one after the preparation of the evaluation, and then one where we discuss the results, and then when we discuss the report. And what do we use for resources? We are very small in Switzerland. The Swiss Audit Office is only 105 full-time equivalent employee, and we are organized in a matrix organization. I will not explain it how it works, but it's an interesting way of organizing ourselves. We do have 8 competence centers. We have 4 financial competence centers, 1 IT, 1 construction and procurement, 1 project and organization, and 1 performance and evaluation, one of the competence center. And the competence I'm leading is the Evaluation Competency Center. We are almost 10 full-time equivalent. It's a small center. And what's special when we compare with our colleagues, we have different university education by the colleagues. It can be sociologists, it can be statistician, can be lawyer, can be historian. It's not only economist or accountant. We have 1 economist in our team. And we can give external assignment, 1 or 2 modules, or we can be accompanied. We can have an expert who is doing the quality control or helping us in the whole evaluation, or we can give 1 module, for example, a survey or international comparison to a private firm, but we always keep the lead on the whole project. We did almost 72 evaluations. We did 72 evaluations since 2005, and we have 5 main steps in the project management and in the resources we use when we do evaluation at the Swiss Audit Office. Of course, one step is the topic identification. Then we make an exploration because we need some days in order to say, is the topic okay or not okay? Because we cover a big administration, so we need to make an exploration, as we call it, an exploration de thème in French. And then we make the preparation, it's the evaluability assessment, then the evaluation, and then the follow-up. And we say almost 8 days for exploration, 50 days for the preparation, and between 50 and 350 days for the evaluation. And preparation and exploration is 1/3 of the whole project. And we are working as our colleagues in Sweden, or we are 2 person or 3 person during 1 year making, working in the team for the evaluation. Okay, we had to present an example of an evaluation. I choose the recent evaluation and about agricultural biogas installation. It's a special way of producing energy. We use it quite often in Switzerland. But when we methanizate the biomass, when we do biomass without oxygen, we can produce energy and in the same time to recover green waste, food, and farmyards manure. It's a policy we are promoting since maybe 10 years in Switzerland, and for producing energy. So I will explain you how we did it. And we choose this example because it was a hard topic to focus at the beginning, and we can distinguish different characteristics about performance audit and evaluation with this topic. And we have two different questions. We knew that for promoting this energy, we had minimum three federal support policies, and we wanted at the beginning of this audit, or we called it audit at the beginning, to check if the concerned farmers producing biogas energy, if they don't earn too much income with this subsidizing, because we have three subsidizing, and we were we were diffident. We say maybe they get too much money with this subsidizing. Is the farmer income from the sale of electricity and the three support schemes adequate? What happens when the main support stops? Does the biogas installation still working or not? And then we need some accounting skills to measure it, if the farmer income when they have their own biogas system. And second topic, which was interesting for us, is efficiency in terms of electricity production from renewable energy. Does the producing biogas energy, does it cost more or less than other renewable energy in Switzerland? And we knew that there were three support policies. We didn't know which was the most important, but at the beginning. So you have a feeding remuneration during 20 years. The farm is producing the energy, and the electricity companies, they engage themselves to buy it, to pay the difference by the cost. We call it feed-in remuneration at cost during 20 years to produce electricity from renewable energy, RPC, the name in Switzerland. We can also give CO2 certificates to reduce methane emission. That's one of the benefits of this system. We can reduce methane emission. It's better to do it like that than to let it left out in the open air, the manner. And the free investment credit is to support farms development. We knew that a lot of farms, they get also this credit in order to have their own biogas system. And the main indicator was the profitability of the installation, the annual return on total capital, and what happens after 20 years of feed-in remuneration. And we did 7 case studies. It was a very hard job. We went to the farm, and we look at the accounting of the farm, and we noticed that every farm has its own way to have the accounting of the biogas installation. So it was very difficult to have a system to compare these 7 installations. So we did 7 case studies, and we compare the different models used for giving the subsidizing, the RPC models, and the CO2 certificates model. We compare. We had to say if this model is okay or not okay, because when the state is giving this money, they have always a model of a normal installation. So results in some words. So we have every year 100 agricultural biogas installation who receive almost 32 million euro, and with these 3 federal support schemes, and even with other support system, we discovered it after. And the most important subsidies were the RPC. It was almost 90% of the subsidizing. What we didn't know at the beginning, we choose 3 regions. You have the map of Switzerland. We know where were the biogas installation, and we say, okay, we want to have representative installation in order to be able to generalize the results. And we saw that almost all the 7 cases, they get money from this different type of financial support. Even other financial support we notice. And we had quite good results about the calculation models. We were a little disappointed, but we saw the way they are giving the money, the states and the agriculture agency, was not so bad, because we had 2 installations who were very deficit. They have a big deficit. We have 3 who has a normal income, 1 which was very good, the number 6, and the 7 which was quite good. But of course, when the farmer who is doing it, he must be a little free to organize himself, and even if he makes a good profit, 8.6%, we didn't find it's a problem. Even we saw that some others, they didn't find the right way, and they had deficit. And we noticed, because of this system of producing biogas, needs a lot of work. When the main support system, the RPC, will stop in 20 years or in 10 years, there are a big risk that they stop also the system, because it's a so big so big support. Even if you have the system, the risk is that they cannot maintain it. Even if you have electrical produced by solar energy, you can keep the system. It does not make a lot of work for entertaining the system, but by biogas system, you need to get a lot of subvention if you want to, even after 20 years of feeding remuneration. And in terms of electricity production from renewable energies, we use, of course, the cost per kilowatt hour. I don't know how to say it in English, well, how much kilowatts we produce, the cost, and we compare it with other renewable energies. And there, the results were less good, much less good than the other question we had to answer. We saw first that it was a very small production of energy when we compare to all the electrical production. We see that the revenue generated by the sale of the electricity was very small, 5 million euro. When we say that it's 5 cents for every kilowatt hour, and that the cost for the Confederation was between 35 and 70 cents per kilowatt hour. So they get 5 cents for the revenue of the electricity, and the states is paying between 35 and 70 cents covered by the Confederation. And we saw also that the support was much higher for this type of energy, because they wanted to support also our agriculture than the other supported renewable energy in Switzerland. Also in international comparison. We did some 2 different tables. So you see that, for example, when you compare biogas with photovoltaic or wind energy or hydrological energy, you see that the cents which is paid for 1 kilowatt hour is much bigger by biogas from the agricultural side than for the other type of energy. And we compare it also with Germany and Austria. Naturally, it's always a little difficult to compare with other countries because the systems are different. But we saw also with this comparison that we gave much more money in Switzerland for this biofuel, bioenergy than Germany and Austria. So we recommend to stop with this support of energy. It was not the efficiency or effectiveness and efficiency were not good enough as far as our opinion was concerned. This example only for giving an evaluation we did for recently. So if I resume what I said now, we do in the Switzerland Audit Office comprehensive evaluation. We are interested on topics concerning effects, but we are also considering the implementation and the conception of the policy. Another important thing is we need 1/3 of our time in order to prepare the evaluation. Another important thing is we triangulate methods between 3 and 6 methodological modules for each evaluation. Our recommendation can concern legislation, and we write in our reports the statement of the agency about the results and the recommendation, and we do 2 years and 3 years after a follow-up of our recommendation. Okay, thank you for your listening. If you have questions, I'm trying to answer them.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Are there any questions here in the audience? No? I have some online question. Well, Tribunal de Contas, Portugal. Excellent presentation, so I'm happy to mention that. I am interested in the role of the auditor in the indicators choice. I do not see an evaluation without a choice of indicators, but this choice in itself can bias the evaluation results, not only for Emmanuel, but maybe other panelists answering this question about what indicators are selected and what are their influence on the evaluation results. Who want to answer this question from Portugal?
Maybe I will try to answer to this question. It's a very important question because you have to list the indicator we want to use in an evaluation at the end of the preparation. And at this moment, you have a document when you say we will use these indicators, and you can discuss them with the agencies you are evaluating. That's very important. It's even noticed in the SAIs 300 standards. You have to consult the agencies, the auditee, when you decide to fix an indicator. It's much more important to discuss it at the end of the preparation than when you are presenting the results. So we try to discuss with the agency if the indicators we choose are valuable indicators or not.
2 following questions are for you, Emmanuel. You said that stakeholders have to be involved in evaluation made by a SAI. Is it easy to combine this approach with the independence of a SAI? So that's mentioned in 9400 guidelines that involvement of stakeholders is one of the aspects of differentiation between performance auditing and evaluation. So how do we deal with that? How can we safeguard the independence of our SAI with involving the stakeholders?
I would say it's a chance for the audit office. Well, of course, Switzerland is a very small country, so you can see, the main stakeholders. It's not so easy to identify them. But the most important is not to forget an important stakeholders, because if you forget an important stakeholders, then you are losing your independence. So you have to identify very carefully the different stakeholders, and it's not a question of independence when you do it. After you are even more independent, your reports are more of a better value because everybody was consulted, the main stakeholders. I think it's very important to do it. And if you only consult one or two stakeholders, it's quite dangerous. So either you don't integrate stakeholders, or you integrate the most of them, the most important, without forgetting important stakeholders. Yeah.
I do think that it's possible to do that without impeding the independence of the SAI. Are there other panelists wanting to answer to this question? No? We had a very interesting conference organized by my colleague Eva Lindström last Monday in Brussels about SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and a youth organization told that, well, we are stakeholders, the youth. As being young people, we have to be considered as stakeholders as such. That was really interesting. Well, following question to you two from Poland. The Swiss Court of Auditors made 75 evaluations. Did you measure the impact of this evaluation in terms of policy improvements or money saved? Very classical question. What is the output of our evaluation?
Yes, yes, we do. We did it, and we do it because it's very important. When we do evaluation, you need to have 3 or 4 years before the main recommendations are implemented. And after, if you do a follow-up, you need to go back to the people. It costs maybe 10 days or 15 days in order really to understand if your recommendation has been implemented. And we do it always maybe 3 or 4 years after the evaluation, and it depends a lot on the evaluation. Sometimes you have a real good results, and sometimes not so interesting results. It means the first indicator we have, the agency must say if they are okay or not okay with the recommendation. Of course, if the agency is okay, then you have more chances that 3 years or 40 years after that the recommendation has been implemented. And we saw that almost 55% was totally implemented of the recommendation, and maybe 25, I don't remember now exactly, was partially implemented, and we have 20% of recommendation which has not been implemented. I want to say that it's the goal of an audit or for an evaluation is not to have 100% of recommendation being implemented. Sometimes, okay, we have our implementation, we have our recommendation, we have our perspective, and it's only recommendation. They are not binding. I never heard of binding recommendation. It's a special concept for me. No, it's a recommendation. It's normal that recommendations are not being implemented. But what is very important is to do the follow-up in order to know what has been made with our results.
Thank you. Other questions? No. So we can move to the following presentation by Mr. Juncker, about energy again. Thank you. Thank you, Emmanuel. What we were telling for lunch that, well, the question was about saving money, but sometimes the evaluation concludes that you have more money to spend in order to have a more effective policy, considering some challenges, especially in Europe, for chemical hazards, health, agriculture, SDGs or others. But
Thank you for the opportunity to present something about the Netherlands Court of Audit and its performance audit / evaluation. I will briefly discuss how the Netherlands Court of Audit is organized to give a little bit of context, because every audit institution is different. I will discuss something about the mandate and the scope that we have. Briefly something about the audit types we do, but I will mainly focus on an example of an audit that we have done a few years ago. The Netherlands Court of Audit is a High Council of State. It has 3 board members, so it does not have 1 Inspector General. It has 3 who jointly decide on what, are the chiefs of the organization. There's a Secretary General in charge of the staff, which consists about 200 auditors. Every year we present a report on the government accounts in May, and besides that we do also a number of other, mainly performance audit reports, around 20 each year, and then 25 other products each year. Our mandate is organized first of all through the Constitution, so that states that there should be a Court of Audit, and the Government Accounts Act stipulates our mandate in what we can look into, so that concerns whether the regularity aspect, but also quite important, whether policy was effective and efficient. I am the chief of a unit within the Court of Audit which tries to enhance innovation within the organization. It's now mainly concerned around innovation of doing research on effectiveness and efficiency. But in the past we have done other things as well. We try to look at things we try to follow the developments in IT, for instance, algorithm auditing. We're looking into how we can do that. We have developed an internal academy to train our employees in certain specific topics, such as productivity analysis or QCA approaches, but also more qualitative research methods. We try to apply those new techniques in our research, and we also want to see how we can report in different ways. So not only bring out a report, but for instance do it with visuals, or for instance also we have recently starting working with a very short term project which can be quite delivered quite fast. Again, wrong way. I think this is also not new for most of you. I think it's the same in most audit institutions. The main difference we have is between regularity audits and performance audits. In the Netherlands Court of Audit, we do not make the distinction, as most of you do, between performance audits and evaluation. We consider it as one aspect, but we do use a lot of the elements which were brought forward here today. The regularity audit is done each year. That's about half of our capacity goes into that. It's quite a large capacity, and that focuses mainly on is public money spent correctly, and have they been accountable, is Parliament well informed. The performance audits are more looking into the effectiveness and efficiency, but sometimes also focus on other aspects of policy. Again, I want to focus now on the performance auditing side. Oftentimes we mainly look at conditions. Are departments able to perform efficiently and effectively? Are the conditions in place? It's very hard also for us to really measure effectiveness and efficiency ourselves. We have tried to do productivity analysis in the past, and we will continue to experiment with that, but that poses quite a lot of restrictions on the data, so you cannot use those methods all the time. So we also try to see whether we can do other things in measuring efficiency, for instance, by using the insights of a cost-benefit analysis, where you not only look at the direct goals of a policy, but also take into account all the other effects that occur through the policy. These studies usually take quite a lot of time. So therefore, in contrast, I would like to present a study now which we have done in relatively small time, where we also try to look at the effectiveness. It only took us 80 days to do. It was part of the regularity report, which we do each year. And I think it's quite, I hope it's stimulating, because with this example, I'd like to show that although examining efficiency and effectiveness is usually quite hard, you can also do it with more little steps. And this study concerns the energy label for houses. This was a study which we did in 2015. I think most of you know this label. It's compulsory to include it when you sell your house. It indicates how energy efficient your dwelling is, and it has a scale from A, most energy efficient, to G, least energy efficient. It's a result of the implementation of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which was implemented by the European Union, so it's compulsory for all member states. The implementation that the Netherlands made was introduced in 2008, but revised in 2015, and that proposed some interesting questions, some interesting issues. I will compare the two schemes. In the old system, a physical check had to be done by an expert in your dwelling on 150 points. The label was not mandatory. If both seller and buyer agreed, it was not mandatory to have it. But the costs of this label were quite high, on average 200 per label for one dwelling. In 2015, the system was changed. This was also done because the European Commission ruled that because the implementation was not mandatory, that this was not strict enough. It did not follow the spirit of the rule. So we as the Netherlands had to adopt it. So it became now a mandatory check, but it became a more light check. So it went back from 150 points which had to be checked in a dwelling to only 10 points. It was done by remote check, so you had to digitally hand in information such as photos or other information where you could show what you had done to make your dwelling more energy efficient. And those were then checked remotely by an expert. And the costs were dramatically less. I have to stress that this implementation was also done explicitly on the request of Parliament, because the first adaptation that was presented in 2015 by government was more strict. It had more checking points, but Parliament indicated, well, this is too laborious for consumers. It should be more easy. That's also what I want to indicate. So we examined how that scheme worked. First, we looked at the reliability of this new label, and we saw by comparing. We had a lot of data about dwellings which were categorized in both systems, because there was a time period where both were operational, so we could compare how the same houses were classified in the old and in the new system, and we noticed that almost half of all dwellings received a different classification in the new system. So this raised some issues with us on how reliable is this system if it changes so much. It could be that the old system was not very reliable. It could be that the new system is not reliable, or it could be that both systems are not reliable. We could not be sure, but this raised a lot of questions. for us. And second, we looked at the quality of the remote check by the expert. And we saw that in 40% of the cases where evidence was required, because that's also another important thing to stipulate, which we'll not go into, a lot of exemptions were made. So in a lot of cases, civilians didn't even have to hand in information. So it was a really low threshold system. But in the cases where they had to apply evidence, 40% of those cases, the evidence was not correctly classified. They had their regulations stipulating what the evidence should be to classify as correct. And we applied those rules ourselves, and we came to the conclusion that at 40% the evidence was incorrectly classified as sufficient. But the main focus of my talk is about the effectiveness of the label. We constructed the policy theory behind the energy label. So the energy label was introduced ultimately to make households more energy efficient by the fact that they live in a house which was more energy efficient. And the steps through the process were like this. That this is what we constructed by talking with the policymakers. This was the mental model they used to come up with how it worked. So the energy label created more awareness with consumers about the energy efficiency of their dwelling, but also with the buyers. And those would create circumstances where there was more incentive to make your dwelling more energy efficient, so to invest in your house because you know for yourself it's important, the people who buy it feel it's important, so more houses would get a higher energy label, and that would be ultimately lead to less energy use by households. This was the theory. So in this very small study, only 80 days, we tried to examine a number of elements of this theory. First, we looked at the end result, the outcome. What do we see about the energy use by households? We saw over time that there was a decrease since the introduction, or briefly after the introduction of the energy label, of average electricity use and average gas use per household. That's the good news, that's promising. So the outcome is going in the right direction. But secondly, we want to make sure whether this was the result of policy or not. So we looked at the number of energy saving measures which were taken on houses. It's important to state that the government had a goal for themselves because most of the existing buildings were quite energy inefficient. So they had a goal that each year around 300,000 buildings should improve 2 steps or more in the energy rating each year. And a further assumption was made by the government that if a consumer or a household took one measure to improve the energy efficiency, it would also lead to a 1-step improvement in the energy rating. Because it's not always, the data was not always available to see how the energy label is developing over time, because dwellings are not continuously rated. So that's an assumption. And then the government monitors how many households take measures to improve the energy efficiency in their dwelling. So what did we see? Well, we saw that the number of measures to increase energy efficiency within existing households did not increase over time. You could even say it's declining. So in the first years there was an increase, but then it quickly decreased. So the government will not reach its goal of improving the energy efficiency of households. So there seems some evidence that the energy label is not helping in getting the goal the government achieved here, had set for itself. I think I'm afraid I set the arrow at the wrong point, because I now want to look at the awareness. How does the energy label lead to more awareness with civilians? We did a survey. We did a survey among 700 households that recently had applied for an energy label to see what the energy label had, what the effect of the energy label had been in their decisions to improve the efficiency of their household. First we looked, because that was an important part, the awareness. Did the energy label give you more insight into the energy efficiency of your dwelling? So did it help to inform you that your household, your dwelling is efficient or inefficient? Well, in most of the cases, that was not the case. Most consumers already knew how well or not well their dwelling was doing. The second part, did you take additional energy saving measures because of the fact that you now had the energy label? Again, the results are quite clear. Most of the households did not. Only a quarter of them did, and only 70% actually did it. And for the others, they said, well, yes, we will, but we have not done it. We're going to do it this year, so it's not been effective yet. And then, if people said that they would, that they had taken measures to improve the energy efficiency of their dwelling, was this influenced by the energy label? Again, not really the case. In 86%, the energy label was not very decisive in the decision to take energy-saving measures. So the conclusion is that although the outcome is favorable, we see that households are using less energy, the energy label is not really contributing to this effect. I have to emphasize this is really a small study. We did it with surveys, so we could not really conclude that the policy was not effective. But I think we can say that we had indications that the policy was not working as it was constructed, as it was envisioned. And we advised the department to really monitor how this is going. If the awareness is increasing over time, what are the motives and what is the role of the energy label? Because we feel that the power of the energy label is overestimated in policy making. And we also recommended to make the energy, and the department took over that recommendation, and they did monitor over time. The other recommendation was to make it more reliable, because as I said, we had some questions about the reliability, but the department there said, well, no, we still we think it's reliable enough, and we do not want to make it more complex for the citizens. So this is in a nutshell what you can do with a relatively limited study to really look at the effectiveness of policy. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. The kind of studies that make evaluators modest and should make politicians modest too, if possible. Thank you very much. Are there any questions on this evaluation, this case study?
Oui.
Thank you. We have some coming from outline. Good presentation. Greece. Could you elaborate a bit more how the energy level system was improved following your evaluation? Once again, what happened after the evaluation? Interesting question.
Yeah, I have to admit it did not really improve in the sense that they didn't really change the system. They only changed the way to evaluate. So they evaluated a little bit more and more rigorously by also looking at the motives behind it. But it did not result in a change of the policy itself, only in the evaluation or monitoring of it.
From my side, how did you consider the other factors having an influence on domestic consumption? For instance, the price of energy, or the awareness of people about how much the different devices they have consume of energy, the vacuum cleaner, the oven, the computer. Do people know exactly what is exactly the energy consumption? They have the label, But is this knowledge, is this awareness a factor for making them do things differently? Because they say no to the question: did you consider other factors for limiting the consumption, the energy consumption? So price of energy, knowledge, use of consumption of energy, which can be, I don't know in your country, but in France, there are moments in the day or the night where energy is less expensive, so things like that. Was that included in your evaluation?
With my answer, I have to stress again how small and how limited this study was. Only 80 days. I saw that sometimes that's about half the time we also usually take to prepare a study like to really do a more general evaluation or a performance audit. So no, most of these factors were not included, but that was also because the scope was very limited in this study. So we really wanted to show, and I agree with all the comments that you can make on it, that it doesn't take into account a lot of those things, but still I feel that this is, because this gives you the beginning of a conversation with the department about how they perceive that things are working. We cannot show that it doesn't work, and we couldn't show we didn't have insight in how other factors influence the decision. But I must admit that when I talk with friends of mine who do not work in this field, this is the perception. If I don't mention that we've examined this is the perception which lives with most civilians about the working of the energy label. So this is a confirmation of a thing which informally most people already were discussing. And I think that helps again in the discussion with policymakers, although the scope of the study is limited, but again, it does raise some interesting questions which we can follow up on. And I would think it would be quite interesting to use a more advanced technique, because that's also possible to see the effect of the energy label on housing prices, for instance, by comparing two dwellings which are on other factors quite comparable, but only in the energy label differ. And then you can see what the real effect is of the energy label on, for instance, housing prices. But that's, again, that would become a much larger study, and that was not what we aimed for here.
Anyway, it's an interesting question that we can see in driving security, smoking, public health, or things like that. The question of how people behave and how they react to policies or decisions, because they have their own habits, cultures, knowledge, etc. And of course, these are factors interacting with effects that we don't know entirely. There is another question from Belgium, more general question to you. Do you in the Netherlands perform all kinds of evaluation, ex ante, ex post, ongoing?
We mostly do ex post evaluation. We rarely do ex ante evaluation. We do evaluations of ex ante evaluations done by departments, but we do not do it ourselves, because we feel that's not the position of a SAI to really be involved in policy development. But we do, we have done that recently with the new cabinet. They've made a lot of plans in spending additional money, and we did scrutinize those plans. How well are they thought through? How well do they, for instance, say what the effectiveness and efficiency will be? How do they do they have a plan to monitor and evaluate in the future? That is what we do, but we do not do ex-ante evaluations ourselves on specific policies.
I guess that's the case for most SAIs here, considering that ex-ante evaluation is more linked to the decision-making process. It works well in the EU. Ex-ante evaluation is interesting. Impact assessment is well developed at the level of the EU with a very well-organized system with some weaknesses, but well-organized. We can see that it was developed to impose to member states before launching structural funds. And we can see that in the next MFF, ex-ante evaluation are not anymore compulsory. The Commission considering that it was too formal this kind of well, assessing what happens in the field. Some people consider that it's not exactly an evaluation, and that if it's too formal exercise, then it's not necessary to impose that to member states, but it's up to them if they find it necessary. But for size, I would say, well, I'm cautious with my colleagues around the table, I would say that evaluation, ex-ante evaluation is not entirely the core mission of a SAI. We are more involved in ex post. Thank you for online questions on these different issues. I will move to the following presentation with Mr. Brokop from the European Court of Auditors.
It's already on. Thank you very much, Madame Lamarck, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. I'm pleased to be here to talk a bit about audits and evaluations. We talked early on to be the first one after lunch. The last one is also maybe a little bit difficult. Some of the issues have been mentioned a bit before, but I'll try to do my best and then skim over where we've already heard something about it. The idea is that we will do like our Swedish colleagues. We will divide it in two. I will do a bit the evaluation and audit and resources, and then Erki will come and do the more interesting part on the practical example. EU passengers' rights are comprehensive, but passengers still need to fight for them, where he was the head of task. I must say, when first receiving the email from Madame Lamarck and Dirk on this, I sort of stopped up a bit and said, evaluation and audit, we don't talk so much internally about evaluation as such as a main product. I think even less than the GAO. So therefore, I thought maybe I would have a look at the INTESAI. What are they saying? I turned to ISAI 300, which is saying something about what it doesn't do. It also explains what it does do, but at least it does not question the intentions and decisions of the legislature, but examines whether shortcomings in law and regulation on their way to implementation have prevented the specified objectives from being achieved. This is also what is repeated in ISAI 3000. They also talk about mandate. I also then turned to the Gov 9400 because it deals with evaluations. And there was a longer explanation a bit about what is audit, what is evaluation, but they ended up having a paragraph saying, in a nutshell, they could preserve the right to call into question the objectives set out in the legislation. I think this is quite interesting that you have some two standards, and there are, how can I say, they actually concur to some extent. I also had a look, and there we come into already what we have seen this morning, the first presentation. Mr. Negre was presented this figure, even though he had already changed a little bit to put in coherence and other policies. So I think maybe one could lead from that this is a discussion which has led or started with the approval of the Gov 9400, but is maybe still moving a little bit. I will not go into so much the details. Mr. Negre dwelled a lot on that. I will though say that also we heard from Charlotte Torneling this morning that the needs, whether they're in evaluations or audit, I think that when we do audits, we also do tend to look at the needs to understand better where we're coming from, how the objectives are set, etc. to try to better understand the issue, I then tried to make this table of similarities and differences to try to say that, you know, they're both evidence-based, both examine intervention logic, implementation processes, and assessment of the 3 E's. They require similar knowledge and skills, experience, and also methods for collecting and analyzing the data. And they share a number of, well, that's a repetition, no? Yeah. Then when it comes to differences, performance audits are part of the accountability framework, where Commission and the other institutions are held responsible for management, or for the management of the funds which they are managing and implementing. Performance audits are carried out by an independent auditor, which I think is, as Mr. Negro underlined this morning, is one of the strengths of the SAIs if one decides to go down the road of doing evaluations. And then management deliver comprehensive evaluations of EU activities. Here we know in the EU context that the Commission is doing a lot of this, or outsourcing a lot of this, to get both at their level, the EU level, but also getting the member states to do a number of evaluations. As Ms. Lamarck has outlined, for the 21-27, this changes a little bit, but at least for the 14-20 we have a reasonably robust system. Evaluations, they can also, if you look at the figure above, it appears to be that they can have a larger scope. I think also this is what Monsieur Emmanuel Sangret was saying, that there is, how can I say, a larger scope for some. Others see it differently. But also what he was mentioning is that maybe, and also talking about these various standards, there should be maybe, how can I say, some reconciliation, some talk between the various committees to guide the audit community for us to better understand, so that when I say, ooh, and then stop, and then try to look, I'm maybe helped a little bit more than I was. Turning to something more concrete, evaluation techniques. Here, there are a number of techniques. We've heard them already now. Case studies, focus groups we already use in the court, expert panels, interviews, and surveys. Surveys are particularly interesting. I'll focus on that. It's a tool we've used for many audits. Erke will come into more practical issues on his very interesting audit. It gives us the possibility to obtain a lot of information. I mean, we just heard it from a Dutch colleague, very short, and you obtained a lot of information. We usually do that by getting into contact with the managing authorities, certifying authorities, audit authorities in the cohesion area, which can add to the report due to this coverage of all member states and a number of authorities. These authorities, they have a lot of information available. By definition, they have a lot of financial information, but now also not slowly, the last programming periods, they also have output information and common result indicators also. But for the 14-20, it's only for ESF. For 21-27, it'll also be for the ERDF. Impact indicators, however, they are not collected. The information there is that, how can I say, is that when we do surveys, we may not only get this information, we will also be able to get information about how these authorities that we are contacting and are supposed to implement the policies thought. What did they think about the Commission support, the guidelines? What do you think about the complexity of regulations, administrative burden, or cost of implementing various phases of these programs? Then coming to the last thing, doing an audit efficiently. This is really a challenge. We have, I mean, the first challenge is to find the contact details of all the authorities. One would think that was a natural thing, but it's unfortunately not. cover sometimes too many questions when we do surveys. We should. This takes time for us, and it takes time for the authorities that we wanted want to respond to us, which may, how can I say, make them a little bit less inclined to respond to our survey. We need to ask the right questions. We tend to ask too many questions, but to be sure that we cover what we should cover. And we end up with a lot of information where only part of it is actually going into the report. Instead, we should try to focus on questions which are relevant and which we already know are going into the report. This obviously requires a lot of knowledge when we design these questions, and sometimes this knowledge we have not at the beginning. We have that during the audit, so therefore probably best not to launch such a survey from the outset, or maybe spend a bit more time trying to understand the subject, do test missions, etc. Then another issue is when we get the information. I mean, replies, or if we get the information, replies are difficult to obtain. We have, in one audit I did, had a response rate of 70%, which was, in my opinion, outstanding, but we also relaunched it 5-10 times and also called some of the authorities. I think there we should maybe be a little bit less ambitious. I don't know what the response rate was from our Dutch colleague, but I think 30-40%, that should be sufficient if you're asking 100 or more authorities to give their opinion on various issues. And then there is the issue of the questions. Are they understood in the same way as we think they are understood? We have been doing an APM for a number of months. We've done maybe even audits in member states. We're very deep into the issue, and then we put a few questions on a piece of paper, we discuss among ourselves and say, well, this is very, very clear, and we send it out. There may be, we should maybe have a test phase, not to send out questions which are then misunderstood. An example was when we did the closure of, the design of the closure of the 2007-13 period in cohesion. We asked about cost of closure, and many of the authorities actually understood it was closure of the individual project. It was not the program. And obviously the cost then becomes very little or very, very big. We had some saying it was about a couple of thousand, some saying it was millions. So we had to call around, and we understood that it was understood in completely different ways. So we had simply to say we could not use these questions to anything. This is what I want to say. Now we come to the more hands-on part of the presentation.
Thank you, Erkimust. If your plane or your train is late, he is the man. You can ask him what to do. He will tell you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Erkimust. But being really the last of the whole long day, I think I have a feeling that this room here, and probably those who follow us online, need just a little bit evaluation. So let's evaluate. Do we still have hands? Show me your hands. Everybody show me your hands. Do these hands work? Try. Okay, so we have hands. Evaluation point number 1, we have hands. Do we have legs? Do we have legs? Show me you have legs. Show me you have legs. Hop, hop. You have legs? Do these legs work? Do. And now the most tricky evaluation part. Do hands and legs work together? Well, the usual evaluation result, 80%, 20%. I'm very happy to present you one audit, which we did finalize last year. It's about passenger rights, but I have actually slimmed to minimum the content of the report. What I'm going to talk about is actually the approach we did for one specific element, which is survey. And this is a tool which can be used both for audits and for evaluations. We have actually heard this term mentioned several times today. And maybe this is something from a colleague to colleague, how to do a survey which is not in a closed population, but which actually covers an open population. Passenger rights is a topic which is very policy-oriented. We don't have a huge funding from the European Commission. It is a regulation. And this regulation applies to all 550 million people who live in the European Union, and even more because when their departure is from the territory of the European Union, although they are not the citizens of the European Union, they are still covered by the EU passenger rights regime. We did an audit which tried to see if that passenger rights regime of airplanes, railways, waterborne transport and bus transport has created the additional passenger protection which it was aimed to. We had, as I said, we had to design an audit which was not money related, but we went into the heart of the policy, and that's why I would say that our audit had quite many evaluation-like qualities to it. The audit finalized with a report, the report number 30, 2018. It is a very good report. It's an excellently written report. It's easy to read, and you will be much, much more clever after you have read it. We had a great team who did it, and I am very proud of the outcome. So I think everybody involved, congratulations for excellent work done. The main conclusion of the audit was that the main modes of transport in the European Union have been covered with the regulation, necessary regulation, but as usual, the devil is in the detail. The actual implementation of the policy is not at the level where it should be, and the passengers, in fact, have not benefited from the great protections which there should be. How do we know that? Well, first of all, we know that because we went and talked to the professionals involved. That means the Commission, that means the industry bodies, the airlines, the bus companies. We had quite a lot of direct one-to-one interactions. We had more than 80 interviews during this audit. But none of these 8 interviews were really representing how you and me, we feel about that topic. So it was since the very early phase of the audit we desired that we built into the system that we need to obtain a view of an everyday person. And we defined, or we went with it, to have a survey. And we had predefined 10 member states that we visited, and we wanted to see, before we go into meetings with the member states' authorities, we wanted to see how these member states' people are knowledgeable of and feel about passenger rights. So we purchased a statistically relevant study of 10,000 people, 1,000 from each of the 10 member states. And with this survey, we had an opinion. I will explain what exactly we had as an opinion a bit later, but we had grounds. We created new information for ourselves, and we created new information for the stakeholders involved and the Commission eventually. But the big problem with this approach, of course, was that it's anonymous, it's just numbers, it has no feelings. So there was another idea which we attached to this, which was what we called later an open survey. Open survey was not statistically relevant. It was open on our website. And this open survey was for everybody involved, interested, free to fill in. It had the same questions as the statistical survey, but with an option that you can write your story or your experience to us. And that delivered, I think, 1/3 of the final report, actually, where we were really able to put specific cases of specific passengers crying on our shoulders through the open survey. And now I will share some how to put it, some insights about organizing a survey. So first of all, we define that this has to be a survey of the final beneficiaries, of the final benefiters of the policy, and in our case it was citizens. That means that we were not able to do it ourselves. We had to have a professional help. We obtained the information from here and there, who are the companies who have a coverage enough to go and do it in 10 member states. And we had more or less an idea how much it would cost. And I must say that when you go into such a survey, then everything you add as a qualitative element, for example, a question with not 1 or 2 options, but with several options, and with an option which continues to another option, this adds complexity and the cost. But now I can more or less tell you that after we got the bids, it costs about 2,000 euros to do 1 question. So eventually we had 10 questions and we paid 25,000 plus euros for the survey in 10 member states. And I think in terms of the outcome, this was one of the best money spent in the whole audit process. We had another thing which a lot of us, actually is quite ironic, because we are auditors and we very often go out and we audit public procurement. Oh, is the public procurement well prepared? Is the public... And then when we have to do ourselves public procurement, that usually is a quite high barrier. No. So what would be the potential cost? Oh, no, it's over the limit. No, better not. And then you have colleagues who say, nah, don't. Eventually, I must say that we went into the public procurement. We were between the brackets of having to have 3 competitive offers, and it seemed in the beginning very difficult and very bureaucratic process, but eventually it wasn't. We have good colleagues, specialists in this field in-house. They helped us through. It is very, very difficult to write the conditions which the companies have to fit to. So that is the moment which you require a lot of internal thinking. You shouldn't rush to that in 1-2 days, but take a little bit of time and read carefully the conditions which you set, because you have to have offers, but you have to have good quality. So it's finding a fair balance. And actually go for it. I think the fear of doing proper procurement, the fear of having enough offers, has put off many great ideas that we have had internally as auditors of obtaining external expertise. We should do it, and my message is, stop worrying, do it. And then, of course, the questions, we had help from a statistician, and this is another point. When you have a professional on board, like a statistician, then soon you will figure out that this narrow professional, especially when it's a scientist, they are seeking for the perfect model. This is sort of like an element of science that you aim always for the pure science, sometimes fiction. But in reality, in what we do as professional auditors, we very rarely can go to that level which provides everything, especially in the limited resources, time, money, and so on. So what you should never put on other person's shoulder is them providing you the narrative for your story. Because audit is storytelling. A little bit more complex, more structured, but it doesn't matter what exactly is the topic. You eventually tell a story. And you, as an auditor, are responsible for designing the story, delivering the necessary proof, and amending the story if the proof happens to be a little bit different. But you cannot expect a statistician or an artist or somebody else that you communicate with to deliver you the story. That's impossible. You are the responsible of the story. And that was what we found out during this kind of interaction with the professionals, is that they would be willing to deliver you the data, but it's up to you to ask what kind of data you want, because you have to have in mind what kind of results you want from this data, and you have to take this data in your hand and tell them what kind of relations they have to run with the data which you have gathered. We gathered 4 elements in our survey. We tried to check experience. We wanted to see the awareness. Experience, basically it's travel experience. Awareness about the passenger rights, the knowledge of the regulation, and the opinions of the people involved. And we got all that. We are quite satisfied, as I said. The first thing which I want to say is that we were very much afraid maybe the 10,000 people that we selected is not a good sample. First of all, the main risk which we had was that maybe they haven't traveled. So the first question we asked, have you within last 2 years traveled on long-distance bus, long-distance train, plane, or waterborne transport? And we got the fact that 85% of the respondents had traveled. So in fact, that was an excellent basis because most of our panel had in fact experience in the topic that we were auditing. So from there onwards, it was all really the fact that we could really well rely on the results. And then we had the question whether our 10 member states are good enough representation of the European Union as such. And for this, we had 2007 Eurobarometer, 14 Eurobarometer study, which did have 2 or 3 questions of the same kind. And we did a comparison. We tried to see what was the outcome of the Eurobarometer study general and Eurobarometer study of the 10 member states that we audited. And we found out that the deviation between the final result of the EU 28 compared to EU 10 that we had was minimal. It was absolutely, it was within 1 percentage point for all questions which they had asked. Because our 10 countries covered 65% of the EU population, it was statistically relevant, so we were quite okay to extrapolate much further than our initial survey really was. So we came to the fact that we had people, we had experience, we had quite a wide a range of actually people having traveled on different modes of transport. We had problems, which was excellent for this task, because here you can see our 10 countries, and here you can see the type of problems people have had in different modes of transport. And it is really amazing that there was a bit of dynamics, bit of difference, but in every country we had sufficient number of people actually having experienced what we were auditing. So they had experienced travel disturbances. So therefore their opinion mattered. And with this sort of a data, we started to become, how to put it, we started to become creative. We didn't really satisfy ourselves with only the pure numbers, but we tried to really see whether these numbers relate to each other. For example, here we have a table which shows what kind of action people took when they had travel disturbance, and then we had a few options in the survey, and we tried to fix and see whether we can come up with some sort of a model passenger. And now this is really showing you something which nobody has seen, because we never published this report in the report, but let's play along. So when we have some people who very much make their own arrangements, so they don't trust on the company, but they definitely complain about whatever happened with the company, we could say that they were quite active and they are very, very angry. We have active, angry, but those people who let the company solve it for them. So whatever happens, I'm very, very much angry. I will make my complaint known to the company, but I will wait until the company provides me with a solution. And then we have a group of people who are angry, but they are completely resigned. So they will do nothing in order to make their situation any better. And then we have a people who do nothing. They are willing to go home, but they will definitely fill in an application to get a compensation afterwards. So this is just to show that if you get your data, you have to play with it. You have to see whether this data tells you another story, and if that story is interesting enough, it's good to put it on a presentation so people can relate to it later when they will seek information about this topic. We did also, what was interesting for this, we did also really a test of knowledge. We had a series of truth-false questions, and we figured out that the average knowledge rate was more or less in line with hazardous or with a probability that when you reply yes and no, that is exactly what kind of average response comes. We could make a conclusion that in general the knowledge of the passenger rights topic was relatively low, but there were differences between the member states, and I think these differences in some cases were quite telling, and we also mentioned this in the report, and we mentioned this in the feedback to the member states involved when we had a meeting with them after the results of the survey came in. And what became really interesting for us was to see what kind of preference does the traveling public have in terms of the passenger rights. There were 10 passenger rights that we tested, and it really came upon that most people had a main desire to get to the final destination as quickly as possible. So there was a bit of a feeling that people use passenger rights for the actual purpose of this. But of course, the issue of compensations, which very often is directly linked to the topic of passenger rights, comes on top of the needs. And here it is very interesting to see the difference between the open survey and the statistical survey. The statistical survey is that on the right hand of these columns, and the open survey, which is really everybody who wanted could fill it in, is on the left-hand side. And those people who fill it in, who take an effort and come to your web page and fill it in, those people are more aware of the topic. You can already know that they have probably more experience, and you can see how really different are the most important elements to these. That, for example, right to access information has a 44.2% support in terms of those who filled in our open survey, and the same right for information has only 30% support among the average traveling public. And this is sort of an indication that you have a more aware people. They value information more than an average person on the street, just being occasional traveler. But for example, we had an opportunity, and this is now an example what kind of analysis you can do when you have a mass of text. In our boxes where people filled in, we had, I think, replies from almost all European languages, but the dominants were English and German. And then we put into this word cloud analysis what kind of feelings or what kind of words were the most repetitive. And there you can see that most English-speaking repliers had some whatever issue on their flights, and most German-speaking had some kind of problem with Zug or on the railways. So this is a kind of, and we had an opportunity to discuss this with the German authorities as well, and obviously there are many things how the railway system in Germany could do better, and this was also something which we delivered to the Commission, and we hopefully can see that over time this passenger rights framework could be made better. And I must say that when we look for what is the weak point of this audit, or this kind of audit, this evaluation kind of audit, is that there is no immediate way how to make life better. Whatever we proposed, and we had quite a very specific recommendations how the regulations could be made better, there is no direct link between our report and initiation of any legal change. Our audit does not immediately lead to a proposal which is in line with our recommendations. It can come one day. We have to work that it would come one day. But definitely this is a strategy which both Court of Auditors but all audit offices should think about, how to make sure that our recommendations, even if they are not directly financial but policy oriented, these recommendations would put into practice for sure. So I would end this overview of our experience with the survey, and hope that our seminar will have nice ending. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Mus. Are there questions here in the audience about this presentation or others? Yes, please.
Just very spontaneous and perhaps naive question, but you mentioned the EU survey, and I was wondering if you considered to include the Eurobarometer, and I was wondering if you consider including our questions into the Eurobarometer, and if that was not possible for this particular audit, if that is by any means a possibility for us, just spontaneous idea.
Yes, Eurobarometer is actually Eurobarometer is a survey which is not, although it says Eurobarometer, it is in fact a survey which is purchased by the Commission from a service provider. So in fact, I don't see any problem whatsoever using that vehicle for adding our question to that vehicle, but there has to be an agreement between our institution and the Commission about the how to put it, about the costs relating to it. Eurobarometer, for example, Commission internally has a big fight who gets their questions on Eurobarometer, because all DGs want to know what is the opinion of their work. So Eurobarometer has a set of standard questions which they ask every year. Do you like European Union? And they see the dynamics. And then every year, a certain DGs add their own questions. Like 3 years ago, or now 4 years ago, DG Move were able to add the questions about passenger rights. And that was it. They haven't had these questions anymore. That was their opportunity. So when we want to get on board of Eurobarometer, we have to agree with the Commission about the framework of compensating for this work.
Thank you. Other question? So online question, one from Bulgaria. Does the ECA present the results of its evaluative work to member states' parliaments? Often that is where change can be made. The answer is no, only for the annual report, where all members come back to their countries to present the annual report, which is published in October. But for specific reports, special reports, in fact, it's up to the members to decide whether or not they want to present the conclusion of their work, but not, don't think, well, it can be to the government or parliament. Well, from my side, for France, we have very often, every year we have one meeting between my colleagues and teams, audit teams, and the European and the French Court of Auditors, exchanging about our program, what we intend to do, but not to the French Parliament. But maybe some of my colleagues can do that and come back to their countries and present some conclusion of their audits, insisting on what happens in the country. But as you could see, that we have a lot of details about what happened in 10 countries in the EU, so that interesting to be considered by all these countries. But usually our audits cover a sample of different countries, but we address EU policies, so we don't precisely go to the national parliaments to present our work. And anyway, everything is public. Everything is on our website. So, well, a question from Denmark. Does the EU have a definition of evaluation? There seems to be a lot of definitions. The answer is no, we don't have a specific definition of evaluation. And there seems to be a lot of definition. The answer is yes, but in fact we can see in most definitions all the principle, the main terms about what we are looking at and the use of specific techniques, etc. So you can see that in the different definitions that we will find in Intosai, United States, other countries, etc. In fact, there is a consensus of what evaluation is and what it's looking at. The question is not in the definition, but how we perform evaluation. We can have very different evaluation depending on the question we ask and the way we try to address this question. I don't know if there are reactions around the table about these two questions. The third question, I don't understand very well what it means. It's an unknown country. Well, the GAO is evaluating at national level. Well, is this also happening at EU level as compared to individual member states evaluating the implementation of their EU policies? Well, we touched there the question of the organization of the EU, which is not a federal system. Well, the European Court of Auditors audits the implementation of the EU budget. This EU budget is implemented at more than 80% in shared management with the countries. So when we launch an audit, we will, of course, analyze the implementation of these policies in the member states. That's why we have different sampling. Depending on the issue, usually, well, in this report it was 10. Usually it's five or six. What is interesting in this report too is that we don't only address financial issues, but also how legal systems of the EU are developed within the member states. So our focus is not only on financial issues, on the budget, but also, you know that, in fact, Europe is strong not for financial reasons, but probably for its capacity to develop rules and legal systems all around Europe and develop rights for citizens, for passengers, for consumers, etc. The EU budget is not a very big budget, so the power of EU is not only a financial power, it's mainly a regulation power. That's why we decided in the court not only to focus on financial issues, even though we are auditors of EU funds. So for that, so our competency is only, but of course you all know about that, it's mainly for our online participants. Our competency is only on the EU budget. For auditing that, we go and we visit the member states, but the member states, of course, they have their own institutions. Many are represented here, and they are fully responsible for auditing EU policies within their territories. So that's why it is interesting for them and for us to cooperate, to exchange about our programs, of course, and to report about the conclusion we may have and the way EU policies are implemented in the member states. I don't know if you want to add something. I had some question to all panelists. First of all, what kind of peer reviews do you apply in your countries when you do evaluation? Do you rely on academic review or others? Maybe a question to GAO or others. That was the first question. And when telling about modernizing reporting techniques, what do you mean? Do you think that only reporting on evaluation results is not enough, it's necessary, or either to use communication techniques, social networks, to walk the talk, to what? About these two issues, is anybody willing to give some answers?
Since you mentioned GAO for the peer review, I'll start there. At GAO, we do not have typically a mechanism for sending out our draft reports. for a peer review kind of process. Like the other SAIs, we do have agency comment periods, so we send it out to the agencies. On occasion, when we have complex or technical products, we do sometimes consult with experts either in the development of those, or we might build into our methodology. For example, we'll have a draft product and do focus groups or expert panels where we bring in folks to kind of give us a soft validation of those principles. And then on some other occasions, we have guides like the cost guide and the scheduling guide, which you can find on our website, which actually are published as a draft copy and open to public comment for a period of time, sometimes up to as long as 2 years, which gives experts and others a chance to comment on it and make sure that we've kind of hit the right points and that we've dealt with everything fairly and objectively.
Maybe we had a peer review on my special unit on evaluation from the Norwegian Court of Audit. That was one way. The other way is also we are publishing our methods, and of course then we can have remarks. We see the comments on the media. Are there comments on the methods, or are there comments on the recommendation? We can also use. We look at the results of the. We look at the comments we became on the media, on the reader writings in the media. And that's the way we are doing our review of our methods. And we have an internal quality system, so once a year during 3 weeks. It depends on the topic, but our direction is making a peer review on making a review on special topics. From our audits, sometimes it's the methods, but sometimes it's the questions. Sometimes it can be the respect of the internal standards. We have also this internal way of quality insurance, and another way of controlling is we have always 2 members of the. Who are reading the reports. We do have a lot of readers on the report before we are publishing them, and the other one is, of course, when we give the reports to the auditee or to the evaluee, we have also the feedback of the evaluee themselves. So we have different ways of getting feedback on our methods.
I would like to comment. To comment on the reporting question. We look at various ways to disseminate our findings. So we don't want to only report it, but we're looking also at making a video about our report, making a blog, making a fact sheet, making an essay, an article, presentation, or organizing a conference, all kinds of ways, because we want to increase the impact of our results by not only bringing out a report, but also try to find other ways which are fitting for the report to broaden the impact of our findings.
Supreme Audit Institutions has always been very innovative in reporting and communication. Other questions, comments? Yes, please.
Until up to maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we only had the internal quality assurance for our audit reports. But I think there was a general impression that it was a bit too predictable and not sharp enough. So we started bringing in not exactly peer review, but we recruit usually 2 scholars from the academic world who are experts on the methods or the topic at hand, who will come in once when we design the audit. They will comment on the methods we choose and so on. and then they will come in once at the end and give their opinions on the final report, accept our conclusions and recommendations. This started a few years ago, and I think it's been a pretty significant improvement to have some extra eyes on the reports. And then we have the peer review when we have exchange type of agreements with other SAI organizations where we review each other's reports, but that's another thing. So this is in every project. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Are there more comments around the panel? Yes, please.
I just want to clarify that I thought you were asking about peer review prior to publishing. GAO also has the internal inspections and also has the peer review from the other SAIs that look at our reports after they've been published. So I didn't want to leave the impression that we don't participate in that, because we do.
Just a small detail, but we had also a general peer review from the European Court of Audit. It was not especially on the evaluation and on methodology of evaluation, but we had for 2 years or 3 years ago also peer review from our colleagues from the European Court of Audit.
A good tool for sharing experience on things that still has to develop. No more questions or comments here, so it's time to conclude this very interesting conference by saying many thanks to all the panelists and online participants. I counted to a bit more than 10 countries asking questions, and most probably other countries who didn't ask questions but who attended. So I think it's really very interesting, this success. Well, I don't think it's necessary to have conclusions after these very rich, interesting contributions. Briefly some words, why evaluation should be developed and why is it interesting. First of all, evaluation is possible. As soon as we have developed performance auditing, I think we have done most of the most important part of the way. So it's not difficult to go further now to go beyond. Second, evaluation is necessary. I do think it's the best way to respond to citizens' expectation about what public money delivers and what the added value and how key things and core expectations are addressed by public policies. 3, it's interesting because it will bring you out of the routine of the usual way to consider performance auditing, because you can ask any question that you think relevant and rely on methodologies and links and professional techniques which are really very, very stimulating. 4, Erkki Moest demonstrated that it's a comprehensive activity, both mentally and physically, so I think that's very important too. 5, it's a good way to make friends because it's a very lively and interesting community all around the world, and thank you again for all our colleagues coming here for demonstrating that we address the same issues and we can communicate on things where we can improve our practice. I would like to recall too that in most of your countries there are national societies. The United States, Switzerland know that well. I personally am the vice president of the European Evaluation Society, chairing the organization next January, and I can witness that in the dissemination of evaluation culture, the link between SAIs, national societies, all those involved in governments of parliaments about these issues is very profitable, and usually the conferences, the meetings that these societies have is a good way, a good place for exchanging ideas and communicating on professional issues. And last, is evaluation political? Of course it is. but not because it questions objectives. It is political in the good sense, in the good way, because it addresses the key question for the society. And that's really very important. It's not addressing policies that are complex, conflicting objectives, expectations that may be contradictory, but it's absolutely necessary to do that, not to kick the can down the street and to address the key questions. Citizens wouldn't understand that. We avoid to do that. And it's probably one of the best ways to reconcile citizens with our their political representatives, and to help our societies to respect or to strengthen the social contract and not to fall apart. So I think it's absolutely necessary to develop these techniques. We are able to do that. SAIs are really the good tool to do that because of our independence, our capacity, and we shouldn't hide away from doing what is our core mission. So good luck, and see you again for evaluation issues. Thank you very much for coming. Again, I told you already, the conference presentation and videos will be available on the conference website. So thank you.